Welcome to the Creative Chats Podcast with Mike Brennan. Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Creative Chats. This is the podcast for artists, makers, content creators, where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. My name is Mike Brennan, and I would love for you to swing by my website, mikebrennan.me, where I have all sorts of resources created with you in mind to help you embrace your creativity. So there are things like the Daily Creative Habit Journal, 90 days that you do that's self-guided, setting intention on the things that you want to create, and then making sure that you loop back at the end of the day to say, what did I do? Did I do what I said I was going to? And what did I learn? And so it's a way for you to keep yourself accountable for a 90-day journey, to set that habit of showing up every day for yourself. That's available there, as well as a host of other resources there. Would love for you to go check that out, because I want to support you in the things that you're creating. I truly believe that when you create, we all win, because you get to be fully alive and the people around you get to be the recipients of the things that you create. And today I sit down with my friend, Andrea Mai, and she is actually someone who is local here to the Nashville area where I just moved recently. And we met each other at a networking event, and we started talking and immediately knew we had some things in common. And I invited her on the show to just talk about not just being a writer, but also someone who is very much on the journey of self and understanding intuition. So we talk a little bit about that. We talk a little bit about like the evolution of yourself and how that affects your creativity, and just a host of other things in there that I think are really important things to sit with and think about. And so if you're a deep thinker, if you're someone who loves to dive into more of the pools that deal with identity and deal with the creative self and the deeper stuff under the hood, you're going to love this episode. And I highly encourage you to check out the resources that Andrea has that she mentions is at the end of the episode as well. So without further ado, here is my creative chat with Andrea Mai. Well, Andrea, welcome to the Creative Chats podcast. Thanks so much for being here today.
Hey, I'm excited, Mike. I'm really, really excited. And you are the most beautifully colorful podcast host that I've been on a show with. So this is going to be fun.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, and I think you might be the first local person of my new, locale here in Nashville that I've had on the show, aside from some people that I knew beforehand that were part of a group that I've been with. So I'm excited about that, as I've been getting out to meet new people in the area and go to different networking groups and things. That's where we met and sat next to each other and knew as soon as we had conversation, I think, oh, we have some things here that are definitely aligned and we can appreciate one another, what we do. So I'm excited to get into all those things today. But just for like a little bit of I love to just kind of flip it over to the guest and say, you're at a party and somebody asks you like, who are you? What do you do? What's your go-to line for that?
Well, I always say what I do kind of falls into two buckets, but oftentimes they end up colliding. So I am a writer and I've got a lot of books. I also teach meditation and ways to connect into ourselves. And then beyond that, I work with others who are wanting to write or are writing. And I've got a new platform I'm building out called Writers of Light, and a lot of fun things. I'm a versatile individual.
Yes.
But yeah, mostly my passion is just inviting us all to come into our hearts and create from there.
Love that. And you have 17 books, is that correct?
I do. And
that's a lot.
It is. Yeah. 10 of them are books. 7 of them are more like workbooks and guides that correspond with the other books. So, but yeah.
So take us back to like, what was the moment that you knew writing was going to be the forum for you to be able to express these things?
Oh man. I've been writing since I was 12 years old. And so probably I didn't know exactly at 12, but by the time I was 13 or 14, it was pretty ingrained already. It didn't become, it was mostly like that young, youthful writing poetry and journaling. Then I started diving into fiction in my 20s as more of to actually work on long form stories, that kind of thing. Uh, and then it branched into, in my sort of late 30s, early 40s, it branched into more nonfiction, really writing around the experiences I was having, like with unwinding anxiety and just generally contemplative, mindful pieces. So yeah, it started early and it hasn't stopped.
Yes. Well, I think that's amazing that, and a testament to your ability to keep speaking to things and finding things that speak to you and then bring those out into the light to speak to others. And yes, there's the pun there too for writers of light, but certainly that's a gift. Not everyone has that ability to be able to examine things from their own life and then create some things that give probably some meaning and purpose around those things and understanding. And then also it becomes a resource for someone else who can then take it and go, thank you so much for creating that, because you have just described what I've been feeling, what I've been experiencing or thinking. And to know I'm not alone in that, that's a gift, right?
It is. And, sometimes it's a gift we don't really want because there's this weight that we feel around it. I went through a long period of that. Now, after like 10 years of really kind of writing around the same subject matter in different ways, now I feel ready to hold the whole conversation with others. But yeah, I've been meeting and walking with people for a long time in that vein of, I get it. This is a thing. Here's what I found to make it go away, basically, right? Here's how I found to dismantle it completely. And sharing those tips and tools, right? But beyond that, I'm just way more excited about anything that gets us a little more in touch with ourselves and sets us a little more free.
Yeah.
And so whatever that is, take the story and work with it, or get rid of the story and work with it. Um,
Yeah, because there are times when the story is the thing that gets in the way because it's a narrative that we've adopted that is either not true or somehow distorted, that blocks us from being who we truly are or doing the things that are really aligned with who we are. I think, I've certainly had those moments in my life, where I believed lies about myself because either someone else told me that or I had an experience that somehow was lesser than. And so my way of understanding that and contextualizing it for myself was, oh, I'm just not good at that, or I'm not ever going to be, whatever, or I can't, and we start filling in the blanks of all that, creating this narrative that then stops us from doing a lot of things that we probably should be doing. And I say should kind of like loosely, but things that would serve us better and help us grow and become more fully alive in our experiences, right? I mean, have you seen that with your work with other people?
yeah, man. And what you just said right there, to come more alive, right? To really like lean into that. We, underneath these stories and narratives we create, we're just this lightness. We're this lightness. And in my last book, The Calm Way, I wrote about the fact that it is all make believe, right? This is all make believe. And our beliefs, what are we making? What are we creating from our beliefs? So, how can we come alive in that? If we want to be artists, if we want to be creatives, if we want to do anything in this world, how can we work with that to support ourselves, to without getting bogged down in the old stories about what it was to be those things? How can we be alive right now, today, as healthy, vigorous, vital beings doing the things we love? But a lot of people aren't quite ready. They don't know they can let go of the narrative. They just don't know, right? They don't believe they can. And they also don't know who they would be without it, especially if it's a
Mm.
long told story that's really deep in there. And so, yeah, who am I? When I was young, I had a decade of serious depression, right? I didn't know who I was without that. And then one day, I couldn't even tell you what happened, but it lifted and it was gone. And but I had no idea that was even possible to walk through life without that cloud,
Mm.
you know? So I don't know.
Yeah.
These are the things we meet in the moment. And whoever you've been, even no matter how long you've been that, air quotes for those listening, you don't have to continue to be that.
Yeah. Sometimes the story of pain is one that we too closely identify with that pain, and it becomes, like you said, kind of an identity, and can keep us stuck and not growing. And I love how you termed it, like who am I apart from that? Like I don't even know what life would look like. I don't even know if life was possible, that there was another way. And so digging down deep, really processing these things, getting in touch with who you truly are. And in terms of creativity, like there are things that you can create in life that are mimicking and modeling other people's work, right? I think that's where you start a lot of times, because you don't know. You're
Yeah.
you're like, what's possible? Let me see what's out there, or I really enjoy this person's work. Let me see if I can replicate it in some way and see what I can learn in the process. But there comes a time at which you need to dig down deeper to be able to use those things that you've learned as ingredients in creating something that then is yours. But the problem comes that if you haven't done the work to figure out who you are, what your values are, what's important to really come alive to that part of yourself, you have nothing deeper to go to. So you can remain stuck on this level of always mimicking and replicating somebody else's thing, or a style that you really like that's not really yours, so to speak. It's just something that you've seen that you're copying.
Yeah.
But I think when we get to that place of being able to know ourselves and then create from that place, that's power. That's something that I think, when you create things that change people's lives, right? I mean, for goodness sake, writing the 17 books, I mean, workbooks and things aside, just writing that act for you, I'm sure, caused you to have to sit with things and examine your life and examine what you've learned, what you want to say, right? That's not an easy thing, right? I mean, can you talk a little bit about, like, what did that look like for you when you're sitting down, you have this idea, how does that unfold?
Man. Well, I think the way it used to unfold versus how it does now, I don't know if it's quite the same. There's still that piece, that initial surge of curiosity. And so, in writing fiction versus poetry versus nonfiction, each has their own sort of flavor of the way the work comes in and through. But generally, it's, are you willing to? So I love language. I always say I love words, and I love the space between the words too. So for me, it was as much about the sort of the beat, the rhythm, the flow of the language. I loved the beats back in the day. The beat poets, and just anybody who understood how to take a sounds that we've ascribed meaning to and like turn them into something. But when it comes to I spent, oh gosh, probably the first novel I say novel, I rewrote this thing probably 6 or 7 times. I never finished it, but I probably spent 6 or 8 years on it, just playing and learning with what it was to write a story, find out what it was like for me to write this story, and watching my own evolution of it, my immaturity, and also my wisdom coming through. And uh, where I was. And that was in my early, I don't know, like early to mid 20s, maybe even up to age 30. Right. But then the next thing I did, like when I finally wrote my first book that I published, that was really exciting to me because I felt finally, after a decade of, I don't know, practice, that I knew how to finish something that made me
Mm.
excited, that felt like it was me in there telling this story, going through it, living with these characters, you know. And then I continued to write different types of fiction for a while. And then I sort of, something happened where it just, that sort of way of expressing fell out of me. It didn't feel exciting anymore. Yeah, and I'm working on coming back to that. So that's a really interesting thing. It's been probably about 8 years since I wrote fiction, and I'm kind of coming back into it as more of a, even if it's just for me.
Oh yeah.
You know, I don't know. I mean, for you, right? How has your art evolved over the years? And
Yeah.
when you first found your juicy juice, you know?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I think that's necessary. I think it's whatever you're creating is tied to who you are, what you're experiencing, and your interests. And so it is a little bit of a moving target in terms of like, even, okay, for instance, I used to do a lot more like pet portraits earlier on, and I used to do more like Comic Con type of events and things that I would attend and have some art around some shows and some other things that I was just a fan of. Some of that evolution came because it was either it's not holding me like it once did, or there was something else that was calling, that was a deeper thing of like, what can I create that's not just merely a reflection of things I'm interested in and experiencing, but like when I can actually have something to say, when I can actually create something that might move somebody at a deeper level than simply like, oh yeah, like I'm a fan of that too. Now there's still some art that I do, obviously, like even the stuff behind me, that's more pop culture type things because that's always still a part of what's part of my world. But I think how I've understood myself as a creator, how I've understood what motivates me and drives me, like what's my why underneath what I create. I think having those moments to go deep, and so that again it's not merely just cranking out widgets of things, or having these exercises just for the sake of going, yeah, I'm doing this, so quote, I'm an artist, whatever. But there's a deeper call, I think, that happens, and the longer you stay with something, the deeper you go, the more understanding you have, the more that finds its way out into the work that you do. At least I think that's been my experience. And that's typically the work that I resonate with, So yeah, that thing of like evolution as a creative person is, I think it's important to pay attention to, and it's important not to resist, because very easily you could find yourself at odds when what seems like the right next step is to embrace evolution, but yet what you're doing, especially when it's tied to your livelihood, the
Right.
expectations of others, or you're known for something, a certain type of work, and you have a fan base, or you have a certain income that's tied to that, to make a change that would affect that can be terrifying. And I think that's why a lot of people, when they're earlier on in their journey, latch onto something and they go, this is what I do, this is what I'm known for, it becomes like a prison for them, because then they feel like I can't get out of this and I no longer am in love with this. So either I have to change or this has to change, but something has to change. But in the whole scheme of it, it's terrifying, right? I mean,
That's the alive piece.
yes.
You know, that's the alive piece, and trusting yourself to go there with all your wobbly knees and heart racing, and you feel vital. You want to, I've said for a very long time, I don't dare go back to fiction quite yet, because when I go in, I'm going all the way in and I may not
Yeah.
come back. Right. And I had things I needed to do. And so now we're kind of at that, we're having that cute little toying with each other dance.
Mm-hmm.
But what you said, right, the identities, and this is a huge thing. I mean, as someone who writes, right, even the I am, right, stating I am a writer, I am an artist, right, like we're solidifying that identity. Really, it's just These are costumes we're putting on. These are potentials we're playing with. But I've had to lay that really stiff sort of identity around. Like I couldn't be happy if I wasn't writing. There's been, I don't know, maybe a half a dozen periods in my life when I had to really lay it down. And I would honestly think, I don't know if I'll ever get back. But then within a few months, I think the longest was maybe 5 or 6 months. But within a few months, it's like I had learned to let go of something else. For me, a lot of it, so I journal pretty much every day, and I have for 40 years, right? It's a way that I think. It helps. I've had a hard time actually just thinking things through, not like the monkey mind, just thought stream, but actually critically thinking without a pen in my hand, without a keyboard. And so I'm actually learning how to do that right now, learning how to, looks like me walking around talking to myself most of the time. Like there has to be some outward expression for me to work my way through these things, but those identities. And so, yeah, but I got to say, even when we were young and we were modeling people we loved, artists we loved. And if that is all the further we ever made it, that's still beautiful. It's just are you staying there because you're afraid of stepping out on your own, or are you staying there because it really enlivens you? Or, you don't quite know who you're going to be when you grow up yet, but if you're staying in those places because it really lifts you up, beautiful. If you're staying there out of fear, that's a conversation you can have with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk also a lot about like intuition, and I would love to poke into that for a minute, because I think some of the things we're talking about right now are certainly tied to that, the sense of knowing yourself, trusting yourself. But when you encounter people who are like, I don't understand intuition, I don't know if I have that, I don't know if I'm broken, I don't know how to listen to that, where do you go with that? How do you suggest people learn to listen to that intuitive part? And first off, to acknowledge that it's there, right? And then listen to it and learn from it.
This is great, because I'm building out a program around this right now and really sitting with those questions. What is that? So one of the things that I've really noticed with intuition, there are the things, a lot of times it invites us into things that scares the ego, right? We've got this little ego over here, right? Devil and angel or something. We can play with that, right? The ego just wants to keep you stuck because it knows this, right? And intuition is the thing that's actually inviting you to move out of fear or being stuck into something that's so supportive. It's always so supportive, but it's based on your intention. And this is something I've finally been able to put words to. It's based on whatever your intention is. So how do you come to it? Your intuition, it's just those little whispers. Turn right here. But we always turn left. Now trust me. Just turn right. I promise, What's going to hurt? Who's going to be hurt if you just turn right? Go down that street, see what it is. Don't like it, don't notice anything different. Turn around, then go back the other direction. It's all, if we can start to treat these things as little experiments in trusting ourselves. Have you ever been out and like you're at a restaurant and you always order the same thing at this restaurant, but then there's like just, I don't know, a little glow around the pad thai instead of the red curry, It starts with those simple things, just, I mean, take a chance on yourself. Take a chance on being disappointed, but oftentimes it's a thing that opens us up to, do we want to live the same life, the same thing day in, day out? It's okay if you do, but understand that that's generally stuck in heaps of identity, heaps of story and layers. It makes for a pretty dull read after a while.
Yes.
Paint the same painting for the rest of your life over and over, right? I don't know. Did that answer anything?
Yeah, no, and I think, I feel like it's the type of thing that the more you listen to your intuition, the more it builds, because it does have to do with trusting yourself. So the only way that you can prove that you can trust yourself is by taking those chances, taking those opportunities to actually lean in, listen, and take, I like that you said small action, because then it's less scary. Because if it's simply a choice of, well, do I go down this street or that street? Do I take something different as far as my choice for a meal? It's a meal. It's not going to change anything radically, unless, of course, you get food poisoning, right? But that can lead up to you trusting yourself for bigger things. Like, I really feel like the next move for me is to start my own business, or to write that book, or to paint that series, or to record that album. And the more we practice listening to ourselves and trusting ourselves like that, I think the less of a struggle that will be. And the more we can rely on data points, for something as unsexy as that may sound, right? To say,
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen what happens when I listen to myself. I've seen what happens, and I'm still here. It's okay. And as a matter of fact, I've learned some things. I've learned what to do, what not to do. I'm learning how to trust myself, and not simply just take on those narratives or listen to somebody else, or continually seeking external validation for all the things in my life.
yeah. Yeah, because as long as you're looking outward for that validation, you're always going to be disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
That's my perspective. It's nice when we do get outward validation, but when your actual ability to thrive and live in a healthy way is dependent on outward validation. I was talking to a woman earlier, and basically said she wanted to write a book, and I love telling people that writing a book isn't actually going to, you're not doing and you're not accomplishing something. It's not going to be the thing that makes you solid. It's an expression of what we are, but it's not the thing that's going to complete you. And nobody cares about our art. Nobody cares about our books, our great cooking skills. These are the things, like when we learn to do these things for us because they light us up and they give us satisfaction regardless of what anybody else thinks. That's when your wild part starts to unleash. Even if you're painting kittens, right? That's when that part of you that just comes to life.
Yeah.
It's there, and it's there for you. And then others get to receive. As they receive, it's up to you also afterwards, for us to go out and champion our work and let the world know that we're excited about it. And if we're not excited or we're scared to share it, right? Because we've all been there. Well, I say all, most people have been there, right? Then it's just, I look at life as experiments and invitations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can just step into it. Just step into that one thing, see what happens. I forget what the original question was.
No, but it's true that, I mean, just talking about intuition, just talking about
Yeah,
what that looks like for us, how somebody
yeah,
can embrace that. And it's showing up for it. It's engaging with life, engaging with yourself, and continually, going back to the earlier point of evolution, right? Evolving as a person to understand more of ourselves, trust more of ourselves, put more of ourselves out there, in terms of our work, in terms of how we show up, in terms of conversations we have throughout the day, like the opportunities, the experiences, all that stuff. That's what life is. And I think the more that we're doing that, the better quality life we'll have. At least that's what I've found when I'm
yeah,
open to those things and engaged. So, yeah, it's perhaps something that's a little ethereal and slippery to kind of
yeah.
really
I
nail
know.
down some things. But I think it's important conversation to have, because sometimes That's the stuff that gets lost in the day to day, in the shuffle of like, I got to get from here to there. I got to, all these things on my do list. We're busy people, and we can find ourselves going day after day, month after month, and not having any of those moments where we're sitting with that and processing and trying to gain understanding or figure out, what does that look like for me? Does that
Yeah.
look like anything for me? Those
Well,
deeper questions.
I mean, do you have those moments? People talk about flow state, right? Being in the flow state, right? That is our intuition in active, it's active intuition. You're sitting down and it's just coming out, whether it's through a brush, whether it's you're modeling clay, whether you're creating a website, whatever these things are, they're like, it's just us because we've learned to trust what's coming through us. That's it. And we don't need to judge it. I would say my greatest mentor as a writer was Natalie Goldberg. And I don't know if you know who she is, but she's written a lot of books, but her most famous book was called Writing Down the Bones. And I came across this book when I was 19 years old, and it just set me free, right? But she would talk about, really, boy, I just keep losing my train here, coming to it in the moment, right? Write what's in front of you. She's also a painter, but work with what's directly in front of you and get those details down. Don't edit, right? We have that's where I was going.
Mm-hmm.
There's a different point at which we edit. When we're in the creational state, you just are working with what you're working with. We aren't going back and scratching things out. We're not deleting, and we're not judging ourselves in that moment. You practice with that enough for 10 minutes, 15 minutes at a time, you get good at just letting things come through. And then you put on your editor or your revision or your second layer of, paint hat, your adjustment phase. You put that hat on later, right? Man, that 10 minutes, 15 minutes at a time, you do that and you get really good at also being excited to open to the flow, because I've led so many writing groups and programs, and you see people who come alive in that 10 minutes that they were so locked in fear. And they're oftentimes, they've written the most gorgeous thing in the entire room, not to like judge it, but like they've set themselves free for 10 minutes and they found out they can do it.
Yeah.
And it's utterly beautiful, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Yeah.
When you're talking about that kind of different roles of creation and then revision or editor, it also reminds me of these conversations I've gotten into with people, and sometimes this is even in corporate training events or other places where I'm helping facilitate a brainstorming session. And in a brainstorming session, you don't want to hear no. You don't want to hear that's stupid, or, what a harebrained idea. You want all the ideas. You want to just dump out as many things as you can. And you want to foster that environment of freedom, exploration, play. And then once you've gotten to the bottom of things and you feel like you have enough to work with, then you take it to another process and go, okay, now let's start to refine what's not feasible because of maybe time or because of budget or because this just doesn't exist, or what I mean, like there may be a multitude of reasons, but I think it's allowing for that first part of the process that makes the second one so much more rich. And you end up with things on the cutting floor, yes, but you need those things because sometimes those ideas or those um words or part of that is part of the process of getting to, it's a bridge to something of where you're actually going to end up. And that is a needed and necessary part of the process. So I'm glad that you made that distinction between the creation process and then the kind of editing revision process, and not trying to cram those two together. Because I know when I first started writing when I was younger, I used to do that where you'd write something and then all of a sudden you'd be two sentences in and you're like, oh no, that's not what I want to say, and you never actually finish the thing because you're stuck in this trap of like, I'm constantly rewriting what I just wrote and I'm not getting any further.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I spent 6 years on the first novel that says closet. I love that. Tell me, like, So, I mean, if I remember it, you do digital art primarily. Do you also paint
Yeah.
with it? Paint,
Yeah.
right? So,
So mixed media and some digital.
What's that process like for you as a painter when you're kind of laying out the foundation, the initial ideas and sketches are coming in, and then coming in? I'd love to hear about.
Yeah. So with training, you learn the basics of things. You learn composition, you learn color theory, you learn things that become tools in your toolbox that at some point you do them often enough. You stop thinking about those so hard and you're able to just going to back to intuition, you're able to intuitively grab these things as part of the process and then be able to focus more on something else of like, what is it that I really want to say here? What is this actually, what am I envisioning in my head for this to look like? And so typically that stuff has gotten quicker and quicker as far as a process because when you do it enough, you get into that quicker. You don't have to think and figure out like even where are my supplies and what's happening here and get in the right headspace to create. That's part of why I always talk about daily creativity is because it allows you access quicker and it also gets you working more often, which you have to go through a lot of bad work to get to good work. And so to keep in that place, that's how you get to be more productive and you get to be more prolific is just by doing the work again and again. For me, whether it's digital painting or whether it's mixed media stuff, I mean, obviously there's different parts of a process in terms of materials I may be using, but it's all listening to myself going, what is it that I want to create in this moment? And then also making sure that I'm not falling too much into patterns and habits that keep me from exploring something that might be a good idea. Or what happens if I take this color and I introduce this? In a digital environment, it's a lot safer, so to speak, because you can certainly undo something and not have something be wrecked. So I've learned to lean into that even more so on the digital side of things and say, what's the worst that can happen? I just undo it. Okay, fine. But now I know this is another color choice. Whereas before, I maybe played it safe and I kept using the same color palette over and over again. So I think it's definitely a dance. It's definitely something that, as far as the process, there's enough there that you lean on that has become a habit, that has become something that you don't have to think about certain parts, so that the important things you have space and room to think about, and you have area to play and challenge yourself so that it keeps fresh.
Yeah.
That's what I've found.
Yeah, I love that freshness too. When we're really, this is the fun thing I'm working with right now, where I'm kind of, I've got a new book coming in, bits and pieces. I know the title, I know what it is, but at the same time, I have this other material that came through sort of the automatic writing process. It was me communing basically with my higher self, my higher aspects. And this work, I was invited to share it, and I had to go through this deep process. And now, because of that process, I'm putting together a program around it. And what I'm having to do is reverse engineer all the things we take for granted, right? When you've written 40 million words, I added it up, it's around that. I found that's not actually helpful for anybody else to know, really, generally speaking, because they're like, I haven't written, a million words or whatever. But don't worry, most of it was garbage, but the thing is, like, how can we, like, come alive? We're in this state, we've got these skills, we're more skillful, we're taking chances, we're doing these things. And then how there comes a point when you want to share that a lot of times with others. So I know you create different materials for people to kind of open up their creative journey. But it's like we've got to reverse engineer this stuff and go back to beginner mind.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
what are the questions? Because we've forgotten the questions. They've become so ingrained in us, so embodied a lot of times, that it's hard to get back to that beginning place. I don't know. For me, that's where the freshness actually is right now, is how do I take this thing that I've been doing for so long and help others come alive in their desire for it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's exciting because even when you do something really well, like there's a point at which there's two paths that I've seen that I think we either kind of keep going over here. Everybody's got their own journey. Some of us are wired to go over here and be this very solo. I don't know if isolated is the right word, but it's you. And then there's some of us who were kind of drawn into working with others more and getting them into this creativity, whatever the art is or the craft is. You know, we want to share these skills, and neither one is better or worse than the other. I don't know. I love that word that you said, fresh. That's what came up for me right then when you said that.
Yeah. And I think there has to be a freshness to things, because otherwise we'll get to this place where we're bored. And if we're bored, we'll know it, other people will know it, and the work will suffer because we're not giving it the attention and the care and the love that it deserves, honestly, when we are creating something, especially when it's other people who are going to engage with something we've made. I think it's important. We're actually at the top of our time already. It's like, I'm sure we can keep talking about this stuff for days and days, and locally we probably will. But as we're kind of wrapping things up here a little bit, tell us, like, where can people find you? How can they get a hold of your books and the things that you're doing? Like, talk a little bit about, how people can interact with you.
Yeah. The best place right now is my Substack. So Andrea Mai, MAI writes.substack.com. I write there a lot about the great shift that we're all going through. I write about creativity. I write about matters of the heart there, but it's also where I touch on things like my books and my other programs like writersoflight.com. You'll find some information there. I've got digital sheds all over the internet, or
Yes.
places that I've been in the past. The other place that I do have a YouTube channel. It's kind of my backlog for the last few years of all the things that I've talked about. But my Substack is really kind of the best place to really come into the now moment with me. So
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I'm encouraging all the listeners to be sure to check that out and continue these thoughts, continue the conversation, and to be engaged, because it's when we get to that place where we're wrestling with these things, knowing ourselves better, that we can show up better, healthier, and keep evolving like we talked about before. Andrea, thank you so much for the time today. And I know this is going to speak to a lot of people and challenge their thinking and cause them to sit with some coffee maybe and just kind of like ponder a little bit more. And so thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for not just holding your own experiences to yourself, but letting them be a gateway and a help to other people who are experiencing things that are similar. And it's just shining a light. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for having me on. Really, really, it's great. I'm so excited that you sat down next to me that day, and here we are.
Me too. And I will see you soon.
Yeah, keep shining.
You too. Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.